Francis has said something true and important. He's halfway to explaining the wars in Syria, Libya, and Iraq, and the conflicts now in Ukraine and Israel. For the full story of why these have happened, we need to get behind the false narratives, the globalist propaganda, and hear the true narrative, the gospel, Jesus Christ crucified. On the way to that, in this video, we will take in the excellent quote from Vendée Radio that the British Empire was built on usury, sodomy, and idolatry. We are not supposed to realize that, but it explains everything we need to know about the mess the world is in today and the weakness of the Catholic hierarchy. What Francis said that's so true and important was published in a book-length interview last June. Church Militant have just reported on it. Francis says, "In any case, I consider myself ignorant when it comes to international politics." I'll just add that he knows a lot more about it than I do. "But I believe," he says, "the rise of ISIS, the Islamic State, is based on an unfortunate Western choice." He goes on, "The Gulf War was a real disgrace, not to say one of the worst cruelties." He admits Saddam Hussein was far from perfect, but adds that Iraq was a fairly stable country. And again he warns, "I'm not trying to defend Gaddafi or Hussein, but what did the war leave behind?" And this is something we really have to face up to. He tells us organized anarchy and more war. That's true. Don't go to war to import a democracy that their people are unable to assimilate. There are countries that have a monarchical system and that will probably never accept a democracy, but we can certainly contribute to ensuring that there is greater participation. The Church allows for a monarchy or democracy or a mixed system or other forms of government. What's always important, though, is that the people can participate. And at the bottom here, Francis says, let's think about Libya, which seems to be able to be led only by very strong personalities like Gaddafi. A Libyan told me that they once had only one Gaddafi, but now they have 53. It's absolutely miserable there. And if we're asking ourselves, why do these interventions keep going wrong, leaving anarchy, they're meant to. They were designed for that. This is all part of Israel's foreign policy, which countries like America and Britain and France are used to bring forward at any cost. Now, the true and important thing, I believe, that Francis said was that ISIS, the Islamic State, was an unfortunate Western choice. It was a creation of the West, of the CIA, of MI6. And if we ask, why would America and Britain do this? Well, it's not America and Britain. Francis is right to say it's the West. What is the West? It's ex-Christendom. It's the culture of ex-Christendom. And it's the X bit that is important here, because it's Protestantism which shattered Christendom at the Reformation. But Protestantism is basically a Judaized form of Catholicism. That is to say, it's no longer Catholicism. It's this heresy that despises the papacy, the Blessed Virgin Mary, the real presence and the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and the sacramental priesthood. These heresies have their roots in Judaism trying to find an alternative story to the truth revealed by Jesus Christ, trying to cling on to the old covenant and to wipe out the competition. And why would this Protestant West support Islamic State? Well, think of the removal of Gaddafi from Libya. Whose interest is that serving? Think of the Iraq War. That was built upon lies, upon a carefully crafted false narrative. At the very least, 9/11 was exploited to take war to Iraq and then to Afghanistan. In whose interest? In Israel's interest. Think of all the leading neocons who pushed it. They're Jewish. They're not seeking America's best interest. And Britain has been going along with this for far longer than America, for the same reasons. You remember after Iraq and Libya and Syria, there was an apparent uprising in Egypt, which looked just like that in Ukraine in 2004. And George Soros tells us he was behind the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. He prepped it, funded it, along with, again, the CIA and MI6. Basically, Jewish interests working in Britain, the EU, America. And anyone paying attention knows that that move in Ukraine in 2014 was part of this build-up for an intolerable provocation to Russia. I believe it is Jewish revenge on Russia in part, and also because Russia won't play ball with the globalist plans. So it has to be weakened and destroyed, because they threaten the monopoly of the global finance system. That's why there was this rush to get out of Afghanistan and to pivot into Ukraine in order to more directly confront Russia. And so what has Russia done when ostensibly it has this conflict with Ukraine, but it knows full well that behind that is America and Britain, and behind them is Israel? Now, I don't know much about international politics either, but I presume Russia gave the nod to Iran and said, do what you will, and Iran gave the nod to Hamas and Hezbollah and said, go. And they did. And this is part of Russia's self-defense against Israel's aggression. You know, 500,000 soldiers have died in Ukraine. Millions of people have been displaced. Tens of thousands of Russians have been killed. Who wants that? Who's hated Russians and Ukrainians for a couple of hundred years? But I want to get to the theology of it, because the politics and the history is so confusing and so full of lies. But the cross doesn't lie, and that's the truth which will set us free. If what I've said so far contradicts everything you've heard about Muslim terrorism or about Russian tyranny, then that's exactly why we need to come back to the cross. 20 years ago, I was in Jerusalem and listening to Rabbi David Rosen talking about creating narratives that can bring peace. So he said, for example, if the Israelis have a narrative that is simply, this is our land, it's owed to us, we're going to take it and move everyone else out, then that narrative is going to fail. That policy that tries to fit into it would fail. If the Palestinians have a narrative that is all Jews have to be driven into the sea, that is also going to fail. And so Rabbi Rosen was saying we need to create a narrative that can accommodate both sides of this conflict. Now, it sounds very reasonable what he's saying, but what's this business about creating narratives, making up stories that are going to guide whole peoples and nations, in fact, multiple nations, and ultimately the world? This is so close to a dangerous deception, to total propaganda. It's not for us to create narratives in order to manipulate a political outcome. There is reality, there is the truth, and only in that truth can the world or any individual find peace. That's the gospel. The only true narrative is the cross, which incidentally goes back to Genesis 1 and right through to the end of the book of Apocalypse for all history. So we should not model our world on invented media narratives or on government propaganda, even if it's claimed that this is to bring peace. And nor, if we're Christian, should we model our world on any one line from the Bible. There are people who read St. Paul saying that the Jews are adversaries to all men. And they think, right, that's it. That's all I need to know. The Jews are the enemy. Let's blame them for everything. That's not going to work, because that's not the center and truth of God's revelation. It is true. It's there written in the scriptures, but it's not the center, which is the cross, which is a greater truth, which shows us how that enmity can be overcome. And it's not by blaming someone else and thinking we can heap all the troubles of the world onto them. It's by self-sacrifice, as Jesus showed us. A willingness to be crucified rather than to crucify. This isn't naive. This is from our Lord, and it works. And it will put that line from St. Paul into context, so that before we're ready to blame other people, we need to make a deep examination of our own conscience and see, how have we been misled from the faith that was given to us? How have we fitted in with this system? We'll come soon to see how this is affecting the whole church. So Americans, Britons, French, why should we hate Russians? It doesn't make sense. That's somebody else's manipulation. I've heard people say recently that most people just want to live with their family, will do some productive work, and enjoy the good things of creation and to worship God. We're not interested in plans to take over the world. Alas, that's not true of everyone. There is a false messianism that comes from Israel's rejection of Jesus Christ, the true Messiah. And it's this false messianism that wants to take over the world that is, for example, the engine for the building of the British Empire. And there's this great quote from Theo at Vendée Radio, being quoted by Dr. Haugen.
Nevertheless, the English Empire is born. And we have, as you've mentioned before, it's born amongst the cross between usury, sodomy, and idolatry, which I'll call the egregore of earthly Jerusalem. This promise, this idol of the apocalypse.
And what does this mean to say the British Empire was built on usury, sodomy, and idolatry? Well, who are the specialists in those three fields? Think of the East India Company, think of the Bank of England, think of Cecil Rhodes. And if there is much good that came out of the empire, it's because of the efforts and sacrifices of people who were not at the tip of the spear. But they were good souls and they were misled. That's why I love this painting. It is Father Francis Gleeson giving last absolution to the Munsters on the 8th of May 1915 before they went into battle. After receiving absolution, the whole regiment, with heads uncovered, sang the Te Deum. These are good Catholic men, and they're going into war to sacrifice their lives for somebody else's agenda. World War I was used for Zionism, as was World War II. And when the British Empire was spent, used up, bankrupt and bleeding, then America becomes its successor. And it's being used today for the same purposes, for the godless global vision. But not because this is in the hearts of American people, but it's in the hearts of those who would use America. If we don't get this, or if we're too afraid to say that Judaizing has never stopped, that it created Protestantism, that it runs the global narrative, even as Rabbi David Rosen said, they want to create a narrative that encompasses everybody. Sounds great, doesn't it? Peace on earth. But it's not that God has revealed on the cross, and it cannot work. And if we won't face this, we risk it coming into the church. Have we not seen cardinals mixed up with usury and the bankers? Have we not seen them mixed up with sodomy and abuse? Have we not seen that bishop in white bringing idolatry into the Vatican, into St. Peter's? This is all a result of falling for the deceit and manipulations of the world, of the prince of this world, of those who deny that Jesus is Messiah and Lord, the Son of God. If we return to the cross, we have the vantage point, the perspective to see that ISIS is part of Mossad's game to bring down Assad, even to get at Iran and Russia. And thanks be to God, Russia beat them. Israel's plan is to destabilize the whole of the Middle East, so that only Israel is meant to stand out as a peaceful, prosperous country. This isn't going to work. The way of hatred and crushing the other only breeds more war. And that bit Francis got right. This strategy is not going to work on any level. And our part is to make sure that we're not part of it. This forthcoming book tries to go into a deep dive on these matters, but we're hardly prepared for it. Some of us have been brainwashed all our lives. Therefore, I've been preparing for this book with 4 others, earlier ones in the series, to show us the true narrative, God's revelation in the Old Testament and the New Testament, which goes back to the beginning and is completed with Christ and the apostles. Jesus has told us what we need to know. Let's listen to him and do everything that he tells us. God bless you all.